All right, everyone. So here we begin a Zoom meeting just to update folks on our fundraising efforts in the Ukraine. And I'll introduce myself. I know many of you here already know me, but I also want to provide a framework for you to share this video with others who may be interested in supporting our efforts. So I'm Reverend Nhien, founder of Evolving Enneagram, and I'm here today with my friend and colleague, Frederik Coene, and he'll introduce himself shortly. We wanted to begin by sharing like the why behind why we're doing this based on our respective stories. And so just as the agenda had said, I'm going to spend just the first 10 minutes sharing a little bit about my background and why I'm really inspired to help in whatever ways I can and to rally folks around that. Then I'll pass it over to Frederik to share his personal journey with you all. And really, since he's really the person there volunteering his efforts, his home, etc. He'll be the one talking mainly about like what he sees as happening in the Ukraine and among both the displaced Ukrainians and those who are still stuck in Ukraine and how we might be of support to them. So a little bit about my personal story, which is what has inspired me to launch this effort. We prepared just a little slideshow for you because I think photos definitely just help. So let me minimize the screen here. So a little bit of background about me. Some of you already know that when I first heard of the plight of the Ukrainians, it was actually this image that flashed in my mind. This is a picture of me in Vietnam with my grandmother. And what's weird about this image is that when I look at it, it's almost like startling because like I don't see myself like the person like I am today, the weirdness of how foreign this environment here looks to me. And yet here we were in Vietnam during the Vietnam War. And so this is probably about a year before the fall of Saigon. And when I saw pictures of the Ukrainians who were fleeing Ukraine, it like just something really just pulled at my heart in terms of remembering how I'm where I am today in my life because strangers helped me, strangers who could connect with people in this foreign land that was Vietnam. And so here's a picture of us. We fled Vietnam a week before the fall of Saigon, and my mom had 3 kids at the time. We eventually had 5 children. This is a picture of her with my little brother and my older sister in Camp Pendleton, what they call tent camp, because they just created a makeshift camp there. And it was actually a blessing because, I mean, most people had to stay in tents, but my mom was having trouble. My brother was only a month old and he was having trouble breastfeeding. And so we stayed in she was able to stay in the trailer camp, which is where she met this woman here, Josephine Collins, a Red Cross volunteer. And Josephine and her husband, Dr. William Collins, became what are known as sponsors to us. Before we could leave the refugee camp in Southern California, we had to have a quote American sponsor us out. And so this man, the young man at that time, sponsored not only us. So here's my mom and my dad, me, my older sister. This is the Collins 2 kids, my little brother. We also had my maternal grandparents, and not pictured here, my paternal grandmother. And so my dad here was kind of the head of the household. Not only do we have our immediate family, but not pictured here, my great aunt and her 9 children also fled Vietnam with us. And their father had to stay back in Vietnam because he was a high-ranking officer in the South Vietnamese army. So my dad at early 30s was in charge of like 2 different families. Dr. Collins, we're actually situated at his home. I mean, thinking about what Frederik is doing right now, Dr. Collins had these 2 homes in San Clemente, his homes that he was paying down, and he basically loaned those homes to both of our families. And so that's where we lived, and we paid rent. And I want to add something kind of amazing. Not only did we pay rent, but a few years later, Dr. Collins sold the home that my parents were renting and then gave my father a portion of the proceeds of the sales so that my mom and dad, so that we could buy our own house also in San Clemente. A big deal. This is Dr. Collins' wife, Josephine, and their and her parents. So we have all stayed friends with this family up until now. And this is in front of one of the 2 homes that we rented from the Collins. And yeah, that chubsters me right there. So I'm always moved when I see this. So I wanted to share that I found this clipping that my mom had. There was an article in the San Clemente newspaper about a refugee hired by City Hall. That's my father. And it was just a rough time, as some of you might recall, that, the Vietnam War was not a popular war. And it was just amazing that there were people who kind of just opened their hearts and minds to us. And it was just funny that it was big news that my dad got a job. My dad was an engineer in Vietnam, a chemical engineer in Vietnam, helped design the water systems, et cetera. His first job here in the United States was that of a janitor or maintenance man at the local sewage plant. When I read this, I was just so moved by it, to think about what my dad did just to put us all through school and just create a living for us. So here's an article about him being hired. It's just funny to read that here. It's a big deal that they thought this guy had the qualifications, to basically hose down a sewage plant. And then just the juxtaposition of years later, with the help of so many people, I was able to graduate from Stanford Law School. And so this big gap between where I was back in Vietnam to here. So in December of just this past year, my parents celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. This is my great aunt, the one who brought her 9 children over here with us. This is Dr. William Collins. Oops, yeah, that's right, December 2021. And so we have just stayed friends to the point where he lost his wife this past year. I lost my grandmother, the one pictured in that very first picture of me, in this past year as well, 2021. So this was a special time for all of us to gather back together just in December of this past year. And now my father here, my mother, these are now their kids and grandkids all together, gathered for my parents' 50th wedding anniversary. And so this is my family's journey. And I just really wanted to share, I'll go back a step here, to share, give a little bit of background as to why this effort means so much to me. It just blows my mind that again, I mean, in a time when people talk a lot about polarity and differences, that there are strangers, people who didn't know us, like Dr. Collins didn't know us. And the degree to which he helped us and enabled our families to thrive at this level is just astounding. And so the fact that, we might be in a position to help others in the same boat is just really poignant to me. And so with that, I want to share, I'm open to questions at the end, but I want to share about my relationship with Frederik. So we've only known each other a few years, but as I mentioned, Frederik is an Enneagram colleague, and we have a few on the call here today. And we met in July of 2019 at an intensive out in California. In just 2020, the pandemic hit. And so we were able to stay connected via Zoom, and I got to meet his whole family via Zoom. And so this is his family here, and you'll hear a little bit about his story in a second. And so just to give you some context in terms of who we are, we're both accredited, we're Enneagram professionals, and we recently met up in Egypt, where Frederik and I both got to present at the regional conference in Cairo, Egypt. And so, God, that was just January. Little did we know how the world would change between January and February. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Frederik. Okay.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Nhien. Actually, as we were both in Egypt, I remember very well that I was constantly on the phone with my colleagues in Ukraine because things were getting really heated up. And even then, I had not expected that what happens now would have happened, basically, because what we're seeing now is basically a complete change in the whole world order. What we see now is basically the biggest humanitarian catastrophe in Europe since the Second World War. I grew up with this kind of idea that there is no war in Europe and it's never going to happen in my lifetime. This is the idea that I've been living with for 43 years, but a few weeks ago that idea just shattered. And now I understand that there is war in Europe. It's not in my own country, but it may actually come, who knows? We don't know, we're not at the end of the war yet. Now, so basically I'm actually a diplomat working for the European Union. I started working in Ukraine 3.5 years ago or so. So I have my network of friends, colleagues. I'm basically in charge of all the development aid from the European Union. So I'm heading a team of 50 people, many of whom are locals. I mean, 2/3 are local staff and 1/3 is basically European staff. And so I have a very close tie with the country because my whole work is related to developing the country, making sure that the health system is developed, that the educational system gets advanced, and so on and so on. Now, on the picture here, on the one on the left, you can see my family, my wife, with me, with 2 daughters, and actually we had a little baby here. It's actually not our baby, the one that's playing there. We had a very interesting story because during the COVID times, there was actually a Belgian couple. They had a surrogate mother that they found in Ukraine. The kid was born, but they could not get the kid to Belgium. And so basically my wife just said, okay, then we take it in our home. So the kid just stayed without any papers. We didn't know anything, but so the kid stayed with us for some time. And then of course our dog there. So this is in our house, which, and it's actually, it's pretty painful to look at it now because this is the home that I had to leave just a few weeks ago, and I may not be able to go back there. Now, on the right, you see my family with our nanny. She's Filipino, and this picture is actually taken just 1 minute before we left on the 14th of February. We didn't know what was going to happen. This was before the war started. This was actually already 1 week before the war started. And when we said goodbye to the people around us, we basically said, look, we're just leaving for a few weeks because it's getting heated up, and let's hope in 2-3 weeks from now we'll be able to come back. But we're 3 weeks further now and we're not back, and we're not going back anytime soon. Now, since we have been evacuated, since we have been able to pull most of our local staff out as well with their families, of course, my job has also become more intensified. So instead of trying to develop the administration in Ukraine, now we're very much on humanitarian aid, trying to make sure that people have access to basic services and so on. So apart from my 18 hours a day that I'm working together with my wife, and in the weekends, we're still trying to do more because there's many things you can do on a systemic level, but there's also other things that you just need to do on a personal level. There's many volunteer initiatives and so on. So you can see on the left, there we are at the Slovak-Ukrainian border, where the first refugees are arriving. And it was actually very nice to see that there are so many volunteers. there were so many volunteers just picking up random refugees, taking them home, saying that we'll take care of you. But now we're already at more than 2 million people who have fled Ukraine and that are in Europe. If you think this is just, what, 11 days or something like that, that's just massive. So basically on the right-hand side, you can see my two daughters on the right, and on the left is Kira. Kira is the best friend of our oldest daughter, and she actually arrived to our house today. They were on the road for 6 days. What is normally a one-day trip is now 6 days. Kira left with her mother. They just had their clothes and underwear for 4 days, and just a small little suitcase. That's it, nothing else. Kira had to leave her father because men are not allowed to leave the country because they can be called for active duty. So, of course, it's very difficult for all these women and their kids because not only are they refugees, they actually have to leave their fathers and husbands behind. Nobody knows when they'll see them back, if they will see them back, because the situation is very, very bad. Now, maybe just to give a few examples of people that we've been helping. For example, maybe still the previous picture, Nhien. So basically at the border, so what we did was, you can see on the left side, we also just went to the border, picked up random people. I mean, it was a 12-hour drive to the border. We picked up people, drove back 12 hours. My wife found a few friends who were also willing to drive, so we were able to take like 14 people just with us. Some have already moved on, some are still staying with us. I mean, fortunately, we have quite some accommodation spaces, we have some apartments, so we can put up most people, but actually as of tomorrow, we'll also start renting an apartment for some more people who will be coming. And for example, just to give a few examples, I mean, one of the women that we picked up the first day, she was together with her mother and her 2 kids. And basically, they were one of the first refugees. They just immediately understood that things will get very, very bad. Kiev was not under attack yet, but they just left immediately. They just had also 2 suitcases for the whole family, and that's it. They don't speak any other language apart from Russian and Ukrainian. Now they're in the Czech Republic. We are helping them, of course, but nobody knows how long they'll be there, and it's very difficult for them to set up a new life, right? I mean, they don't speak the language. The kids, are they going to go to school or what? So there's so many questions that just come into the whole game. And also, for example, while I already told the story about Kira and her mother, and basically because they're neighbors, we wanted to help them. We basically, I got the news from the friends from the United Nations that they were going to have a convoy, the last convoy leaving capital city. And we were able to get a few seats for them in the convoy. And we called them up, and my wife basically said, you have to leave. You're leaving tomorrow. The people they're in such a shock that they're not even able to make the decision themselves. If you're being bombed for 1 week, you're not able to sit down and really think rationally, what am I going to do? Am I going to stay or am I going to leave? Everybody we see at the border, they all suffer from a post-traumatic stress disorder. Every single one of them. The ones that stay behind, it's even worse for them. So, yeah, then also, for example, another one that we got was Ina, and she actually told my wife today that the city she's from, Mykolaiv, the city was bombed just again last night, and just a few blocks away from her, all apartment blocks were just damaged. And the best friend of her son, who's 10 years old, this boy, the best friend is still alive, but both his parents and his sister were killed during the attack. So basically the boy is completely on his own. And also today I spoke to my wife, and we're trying to find a way to get him, and if needed, we'll just adopt the kid, because the situation is really, really bad. Now, so basically, I mean, as I said, the needs are immense. What is needed is just huge, and I'm really very thankful for what Nhien has been doing in trying to to have people also donate to this. Because, I mean, as I already said, there are so many refugees. There's 2 million refugees already. And let's say this is the first wave. Let's say these are the lucky ones. These are still the ones who had the means of leaving the country. They had the means of, some had a car, some were able to pay for a bus or a train ticket and so on. Some have some friends or relatives in Europe. But actually, most people are still behind. Most people don't have the means even to leave the city. Now, so the ones that are staying with us, for example, we can take care of them for some time. I mean, we provide shelter, of course. We need food for them as well. We need clothing because, look, they came without clothes. So there's some help needed there. But actually, what is even more needed is help for the people who stay behind. And on these pictures, you can see, for example, on the left, this is a friend of mine who's actually just going to the shop in the morning, standing in the queue, because the shops are almost empty. Everybody wants to buy anything that's still there. And she's just standing in the queue for a few hours. She buys as much as she can. And then she just goes to apartment blocks where you have elderly people and just distributes the food for them. Because these people, they're not able to go to the shop themselves. Imagine you're 82 years old. You live on the 10th floor and there is no electricity. Basically, the elevator is not working because if there is a bombardment or suddenly they switch off the electricity, you're stuck in the elevator. So basically, you have to go up and down the staircase. And if you're 82 years old, you cannot do that. And then you cannot stand for 2 hours in the queue for the supermarket, not knowing what you're going to be able to buy. Also, medicine is very difficult to find now in pharmacies. The whole supply chain is completely broken. So there's people who are actually volunteers. And for example, the girl there on the left, Liana, she is distributing food. Also in the middle, you can see these boxes and bags with food, right? This is actually the father of Kira, this little girl who's the best friend of all of us. He was actually driving one of the cars in this convoy, but he had to go back. Actually, he drove them to the border and then he had to drive back. And we basically gave him $800. We said, just go to the supermarket close to the border where you have still everything. You just fill up the whole car and just bring it to the people in our neighborhood, the ones that are really needed. So there's so many initiatives, actually. There is also a big initiative that my wife and I have been supporting. It's there's an organization called Sanigidio. I don't know if any of you knows that. It's basically an organization. It's a Catholic organization, actually. It was set up about 50 years ago, and the aim is really to support the homeless and the most needed, the most vulnerable people. So my wife and I, for the last year, have been volunteering and have been feeding every Saturday lunchtime. We've been bringing food for the homeless people. And actually now this organization is doing even more. They're also taking care of all these migrants. There's many people who fled from the capital city to the west of the country because they don't want to leave the country. But there is no food for, I mean, these are people who left everything behind. They don't have money. They found a place somehow, somewhere to stay. But they don't have food, they have no access to medicine. So there's many of these grassroots level initiatives, actually, where support is really needed. And as Nhien already said in the beginning, one thing is the people who are, let's say, fortunate to be able to get out of the country, but the situation for the ones that are behind is even worse. Yeah, that's it. And of course, I'll be very happy to answer all the questions that you may have on this. Nhien, we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry about that. Yeah, thank you so much. I was just saying that, I'm going to stop the share right now and go back to here to gallery view, where we'll give each of you an opportunity to ask questions. I mean, obviously, Frederik's the expert as to what's going on here. But as you were speaking, Frederik, I did want to speak to a few things that your sharing or your stories brought up for me in terms of my family's history. One piece is the language, right? I mean, we take for granted as English speaking individuals, right? But just having traveled recently, going to Egypt, going to Mexico, where I don't speak the language, it's terrifying, to not speak the language and have all of that thrust upon you at the same time. Also, I told you that there were two families, right? My father and his kids, but then my great aunt and her kids. And to come to this country without, I mean, the primary source of income was her husband, right? So like she started just by taking sewing jobs, you know, and again, even people who are educated in a country, when you come to this new country and you don't have like the certain skill sets, there's something about bringing you in. And I'm remembering now that my dad told me how Dr. Collins, like the first thing he had to do was show him how to write a resume. You know, like there are basic things for like helping people to make it. And then let's go all the way back to the beginning where what's crazy about this is, you know, I was immediately calling them refugees, and Frederik had to correct me and say, oh, displaced, because they're not certain they want to be refugees yet, right? You know, and I remembered that I just assumed when we fled Vietnam that that my father knew he was fleeing to the United States to build a new life. And only years, decades later, did I realize he thought he was fleeing the fighting in Saigon and that they were coming back. Like to leave your home country and to realize we're never going back after you leave. I mean, and to feel how this could very well be the situation for people who just grab their things thinking, we're going to go back home. We're just going to leave temporarily, you know, for the fighting and that destabilizing aspect. And I know that there's some certified therapists here. And I was like, oh God, what can the Enneagram community do? And I'm like, there's going to be a need for therapy for sure. I mean, there are just things like that, well beyond even just the basics of life. So I wanted to offer that framework and just like kind of get us offer a sense of like that perspective, but also I think one of the beautiful things about the position Frederik is in, I mean, obviously, right, that we're in relatively privileged positions, the both of us, and perhaps all of us who are on this call. And so in that place where, but also he in particular with his occupation and just being sort of on the ground floor, knowing like where's government funding going? Where are programs being directed right now, which gives us the advantage of, well, let's see where we can help where people aren't being helped, right? Where they may fall through the cracks because the system just doesn't cover or hasn't factored in or thought about the system. And so part of wanting to be useful, right, is like to not duplicate efforts that are already being done. And so to have Frederik's expertise here around the allocation of funds. And I know initially when I invited people to donate, we talked about just to feed people, but now my understanding from Frederik is like, we've raised so much money, which is amazing, that's already covered for a few months. And that ideally, if folks are okay with it, a good portion of what's even already been donated can be allocated to support the elderly who are essentially trapped right now in Ukraine. So with that, I'll hand it back to Frederik, and feel free to also raise your hand to ask questions of us. Yeah.
Indeed, we're very privileged. And as some of my colleagues say, we're something like 5-star refugees, because we as the international community, we had the means, we drove off a week before the war started. And we have our good conditions, right? I still have my good salary and so on, and I don't have to worry about my job. But for most people who are coming, it's much worse. And the second thing is, indeed, I mean, what Nhien is saying is there is a gap, right? I mean, there's governments who are donating and supporting programs. There's international organizations, like if you donate to UNICEF, for example, the money is going to be put to good use. But there's quite let's say, a significant part of that that's roamed off for all their administrative fees and so on. Whereas with this kind of grassroots level initiatives, it really goes 100% to the people. I mean, there's not even 0.5% that goes to admin fees or anything like that. It really all goes straight to the people. And for example, what we're doing is, I mean, there's friends of ours who are supporting people already. They don't have money. I mean, they already spent their own money on it. They spent all their savings already on supporting other people. So we're just also sending some money. And because actually without this type of support, many people would not survive actually. Because again, the war is not over yet. And especially for the elderly, if you're completely trapped, if you're completely stuck, you don't get food, you can survive for some time, but after some time, even that is not enough. And indeed, this is why I think finding this gap is super important, because I think this is where most lives are going to be saved, just in the gap of the most vulnerable, because the bigger programs always go to the ones who are the most accessible, right? And it's understandable. If you have to work with millions of dollars, then indeed you have to come in with a huge machinery and so on, but quite often the most vulnerable people are invisible. And this is what we're trying to do. We are looking for the invisible people and supporting those.
Yeah, thank you again. And so again, feel free to just unmute yourself if you have a question to ask Frederik. And
or a question to Nhien.
yeah. I see tears here. I'm going to, while we're waiting. Oh, go ahead. Is someone trying to ask a question here? Is it Mary? Mary, you're not muted anymore. Are you endeavoring to ask a question there?
She's been trying to connect to audio for some time.
Oh, okay. So while we're waiting, then I want to share something. So if you're on this Zoom call, chances are you have already made a contribution to this cause, and I'm so grateful for that. I want to honor that Reverend Claire is here, and that the IA Great Lakes joined our cause. You know, it started out as an Evolving Enneagram community where I was like, there's just me, folks, I can donate a few $100s. And then I'm like, well, ask around, and you know, just asking around. Suddenly when it just came pouring in, I'm like, well, just post on Facebook. And then fellow, you know, Enneagram professionals who just our Facebook friends saw it, and we're just inspired to pool our resources together, and just the sense of efficacy to feel like, oh my God, the little me and the drop that I could do. And now we have like a sizable pool that can do something substantial, right? It's just so meaningful to me. And a part of, again, sharing our individual journeys is, many of you don't know who I am, and you're sending money to my personal account, you know? And so I'm just so grateful for the trust that you place in me. And that's a part of me wanting to share like the why behind like how meaningful this is to me, and to let folks know what sacred trust I hold, you know, your contributions in, and just to share how vigilantly Frederik and I are trying to really discern like the best use, you know, like the wisest use of those funds. And of course, we're open to thoughts and feedback. And related to that, one of our Evolving Enneagram members, Kathy Joliffe, created this amazing artwork, and then we ended up being able to sell it to fundraise for more money. And so I'm wondering, Kathy, if you'd be willing to kind of share. I'll post it on Facebook, but if you're willing to kind of put some of those pieces forward or share about it. Yeah, you're still muted there.
Yeah. Well, the one I have out in the other room, because we're going to deliver it today, but Tom can get it. But then I don't know if you can see.
It's a little shaky there. But
yeah, sorry, I'm trying
wow.
Let me. I don't know, because I'm looking at a little teeny picture of it, so I don't know if you can see. Does that show?
Yes.
And then I just did, I don't know, I've just been, one of my very favorite flower is sunflowers. And I did not realize it was the national flower of Ukraine.
Oh, wow.
But I don't know. I just saw some pictures of people. This is the other one. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Oh, Josh.
That one's going to somebody here. But I just, I'm a very emotional painter, so I don't paint very often. But if something comes up, sometimes these kind of visionary things faces and people come and just different pictures. So most of these are just kind of inspired from that. And one of these other ones is going probably to somebody else to be donated some more money to the Ukraine cause. Yeah, but I may have one left, which I'm willing to sell and donate also if anybody's interested. But anyway, that's kind of what happens when something like this comes up for me.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah,
anyway.
thank you so much, Kathy. Yeah, I was so blown away when I saw your artwork, and it is, I mean, to me, it's healing to it's almost like see my own emotions externally, represented through your art, and I imagine it's that way for many of us. It's like a cathartic experience, and again, just kind of speaking to how even as I'm speaking, not all of us are in a position to give money directly, right? But I know for me, like I'm not there physically, and like, what can I do from where I am? And we each have our respective talents and gifts. So even if you're watching this and you're thinking, oh, well, I'm maybe not in a position to give financially right now, there's so many ways, again, to donate our time and our talent to support this cause. So thank you again, Kathy, so much. Yeah, thank you. So with that, again, we really just wanted to be available to, oh, I see a question, Stuart or Stu. Yeah, hi.
Hi, thanks. I'm sorry for joining so late here, so I don't know if this has already been covered, but kind of the two things I was listening to this morning was the need for psychological first aid. And apparently that's a pretty big issue because, like I say, these people have been displaced and they've certainly been traumatized by it. So that's the one. Then the other one, the need that I heard was, getting on top of medicines and medications for these folks that, maybe escaped with, a month's worth of, medications, and finding that out, and then, getting a handle on that, on what are they going to need in the near future. And of course, medicines have different names and doses and things like that. So that can be, potentially a pretty big issue with folks. So again, I don't know if it's been covered. I'll watch the replay, and I may have to go suddenly here because I'm working. But yeah, so thank you for all you guys are doing. And thank you to my boss, Frederik, who I call the boss.
Yeah, thank you so much. Oh, let me mute you so it's not reverberating there. Yeah, Frederik, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, I can quickly speak to that because Stuart, indeed, what you were saying about psychological support is just immense. I mean, I already said in the beginning about PTSD. Everybody that I have been speaking to at the border had severe issues, and also our own staff, our local staff especially, but also our expatriate staff, even the people who were so lucky to get out of the country 1 week before. I mean, I'm not a therapist, but I do some coaching, and I already had to work with 3 of my own staff, basically, just to bring some more positivity in their lives now. And if you just think that European staff that are well paid, I mean, let's say the 5-star refugees, if they already have psychological problems, what about the people who were there when the bombing was happening? And that's going to be a very tricky one. There is not enough psychotherapists to deal with all of that. And also the financial means are not there. And it's traditionally something that's always forgotten. We always think about the material support, but never about the psychological support. Now on medicine, look, indeed, there are different organizations that are dealing with medical supplies and so on, but the big problem right now is getting things into the country. There's lots of goods already waiting at the Ukrainian border. The problem is getting it in. Who's going to drive it in? Not a single European insurance company is going to insure a truck and a truck driver going inside of Ukraine. And the Ukrainian truck drivers, sorry, they have other things to do. Many of them are fighting. So there's a huge logistical problem, and it's not only for medicine. But actually, I mean, I was also mentioning before this organization that I'm volunteering with, Sanyegidio, they are actually doing a lot of that now. They're really looking for example, people who need insulin. They run out of their own supplies, and they have been able to identify a stock of insulin. They are asking people like who needs it, and they're actually delivering it to the people. And again, it's not that they're just going there and giving it. Your life is under threat when you're going there, right? There's in the last 2 days, there's been so many people who got killed while they were actually bringing food and medicine to people who needed it. So it's not just an issue of money and a logistical issue of finding it. It's actually a matter, there is a huge security threat involved in bringing it. So.
Yeah, thank you. And again, yeah, one issue, of course, is supplying in there. But as Frederik said earlier, I mean, the advantage of his knowing actual individuals who are still within the country and knowing that they're trustworthy in their ability to help at least bring whatever supplies are existing to the people who need it right now. And if we can funnel some of our funds to them, that could be of great support. And so we talked about how instead of, transferring the funds all to Frederik right now, that I would just directly transfer some of the funds over to these individuals that he deems trustworthy. So again, this is about disclosure and making sure that people who are sending money know exactly where that money is going. But yeah, thank you so much. I'm just aware of
maybe one more thing that I want to say.
Yeah.
I mean, we're also in the next few days and weeks, we'll also have pictures of people who are actually getting the support, because I think it's very important that you actually see what is happening with the money, that you see the faces of the people who are actually getting something from you. But I want to make one small warning there. Not everybody wants to be photographed.
Yes.
It's very traumatic, right? And pictures will be taken of those who want it and so on. But there's quite a few people who are like, why do you need a picture of me? Like, they don't get it, and we're not going to force them. The main aim is not to have pictures of people in need. The main thing is making sure that they have a way to survive, right?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for making that statement, Frederik. Yeah, and thank you again, Stuart. Yeah, I want to.
One other quick, I know you're running out of time. I have a friend who's an art therapist, and we were chatting about that and just making sure, that that children, especially, but also adults, can process, create through art. What they're going through.
Yeah. Thank you. Just in the interest of time, I want to call Rev Claire up right now to speak.
Thank you, Nhien. Thank you so much for your story. And Frederik, you have some people who don't know you and others holding you. I wondered about the Red Cross and, especially with your picture with this beautiful doctor who became a part of your family. And so I just wondered about, Red Cross typically will go into war zones. And so even though they're in danger, and then you mentioned the Catholic organization that you're working with. And I feel very confident for many different reasons, sending money to you through Nhien. And our whole board, I sent the note out and just said, what do you think? And they just said, yes. It came that quick. There was no pause. So I do want to be most efficacious. I don't like red tape. And so, if you would recommend what first, second, and third, because I'm sure these first gifts that have come in are they're kind of priming the pump for us to do anything we can for you. So just, if you could give us the website of the other organization, and then even just saying 1, 2, 3, no ego involved at all. If you feel like the money coming to you first is best, I appreciate people who are foregoing the red tape and also not taking pictures of those who don't want their pictures taken, who are in crisis. So You have my vote of confidence for whatever reason. I don't know. It's just the universe is calling out and saying, we can trust both of you.
Wow, so meaningful, so meaningful. Frederik, did you want to speak at all to Rev Claire?
Oh, thanks a lot, Claire, because I think trust indeed is very important, and I'm very grateful that you have that trust in me. I don't need the money on my account. It can go straight to these organizations. The less intermediaries, the better, the faster it is. Again, for the time being, for most of the people who are staying with us, we can take care of them. Yes, it'll take some of our savings, but that's what we have to do, right, in this situation. Maybe just one small comment I want to make on the Red Cross. Indeed, Red Cross, I mean, especially the ICRC, right? They are the ones that normally go to the conflict zones and even in war times. But what happens is when a conflict erupts, normally it starts very slowly and it becomes bigger and bigger and bigger. And they come in when a conflict starts and they grow as the conflict expands. What happens here is that it came out of the blue. Nobody expected it. In order for ICRC to really field a huge team of people who are going to work, it takes them a couple of months. This is one of the big problems we have now. When there's a humanitarian crisis, normally the United Nations, they're there very quickly. When there's, for example, a war or something like that in Syria, they were already partially present and they just expanded their presence. Now, they were hardly present. They have to start from scratch. And yes, when there is an earthquake somewhere, well, they can quickly bring in a few planes and do this and that and that. But what we see now is much, much bigger than an earthquake. And this is exactly the problem. This is why the type of things that we collectively are doing here now is so super important, because we can help the people now that cannot wait 2 months to be helped. When the whole institutional support is going to come in, that's too late for them. That's a big challenge that I have in my professional day job. How do we get the support there quickly? We've got trucks and trucks of food ready at the border. How do we get it in the country? How do we deal with the logistics? I mean, I know people who can just bring bread and eggs to some people here and there, but how to deal with millions of people? This whole systemic thing is super, super complex. And also the ICRC, the Red Cross, they're doing a tremendous job, but they're not there yet. I mean, part of them is there because the conflict was there in the East already, but what they are doing now is minimal, and unfortunately.
And you're saying the invisible people, right? That's who you have access to in ways that others don't. Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. Look, I mean, imagine yourself. Imagine that you have 1,000 breads and you're coming to a place and there's so many needy people and they're all queuing. You just start distributing it to the people who are close to you, right? You're not going to have the reflex of saying that, well, you may have the reflex of just keeping 100 breads aside and then going to the places and trying to find the people, but you have to know where to find them, right? And actually distributing 100 breads to the most invisible is super time consuming. It's much easier if the people are coming to you, right? If you have 1,000 people just coming and picking it up, you don't need to do much, but really targeting the most invisible, it's very labor intensive. And that's why you need volunteers, but I have access to a huge volunteer network actually in Ukraine. The organization that I was volunteering with, they have hundreds of volunteers throughout the country.
Yeah, thank you. And again, special thanks to the IA Great Lakes, again, a bunch of people who don't even know us, to be willing to trust us and kind of pay it forward there. Yeah. So thank you so much, Reverend Claire. Yeah. I want to invite, Amalka's had her hand up for a while. I want to just invite her to share now. So if you can unmute yourself. Yeah.
Very, very briefly, I want to express my deep appreciation to the two of you for providing this opportunity to us, and please keep us posted on what's needed. Our hearts are deeply with you, Frederik.
Thanks.
Kathy, thank you for blazing the trail to show us that it isn't just the cash we already have, that even though we are so far away from the need, that we can turn our passions and our talents and our time into funds that can be used in a very direct way. So I'm very moved and very thankful.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Malka. Yeah. Oh, okay, Laura. Wait, Laura, you're mute. Okay,
Yeah,
there we go.
Yeah, just real quickly, just going back, from a psychologist point of view, and just thinking of the tremendous PTSD across, just what Frederik was sharing, and particularly just thinking about the children, being now I'm mostly a somatic practitioner, and it's just a little seed right now, but I'm thinking of some very simple techniques that could be taught by anyone with very little language involved. In other words, because he was talking about all these language barriers, and just I would be willing to do something that could just reduce physiological, because as we know, fear is a huge physiological stressor, and it actually has been known to create a heart attack like instantly. So I just am thinking about what could I do that could be simple, not obviously, ideally each person could be dealt with, but that's not going to happen. So anyway, I don't have a plan for how I could make that happen, but I just wanted to offer that I can teach some very simple stress calming, heart calming, physiological techniques that children can learn very easily, as well as adults, if that's helpful.
I'll jump in really quickly to say, I mean, that sounds so amazing to me, because I think about sort of the years of therapy I paid for after landing in the US, and my own parents really not, I mean, even culturally, not even comprehending the idea of psychology, right? And we hit the ground running. Basically, it was like there wasn't a grieving process. We left a country, but there was no way to process that trauma, not culturally or otherwise. And I think only years later did I realize how much I was holding on sort of behalf of the whole family, and needing to heal and process. But imagine young kids already knowing how to somatically release some fear or tension from their bodies. I mean, I just imagine how profound and how healing that would be. And I even wonder about Frederik teaching his kids to show the other kids something like that, how amazing that would be, So thank you so much, Laura, for that. It was a great idea. And I think that that's something I'd love to find out how we can pass that along. Right. Yeah. Thank you, Laura, so much.
You.
Yeah. Frederik, do you have any comments about that? Or
Well, look, I'm really thinking about this whole psychological thing, because this is something that's actually it always comes last, right? First you fill the stomach, and then if there's still time and some resources left, then you may think about the psychological, whereas this should actually come at the same time. But it's very difficult to bring in this psychological support, and the sooner you bring it in, the earlier. Again, it's a huge thing, how to roll this out, because, well, actually, even if you help 3 people, you already helped 3 people, right? That's better than nothing.
yes.
And because sometimes we are also megalomaniac, we want to change the whole world, right? Or at least that's what I have. I'll speak of myself, and especially with my job, where we want to help millions of people immediately.
Yes.
I was wondering how we would deal with the language issue, and the idea of doing somatic makes so much sense on a million levels. The first of which is how accessible it is to someone who is in trauma presently, whereas other talk therapies and longer processes, you're not even accessible to that immediately. So even a quick Google search, we might be able to come up with something where we can share some very simple breathing techniques, very simple brain gym type of things that are easy to teach across language barriers as well.
Amazing. Amazing. Yeah, I see that Kathy's hand is up. Here we go.
So I also think the man that spoke about the art therapy, I have worked with kids in the past that were just in schools that maybe had learning disabilities. And I don't know if there's any way I mean, I would love to be able to donate art supplies or anything if that would be something they could get to children or even elderly people, because I think if they can express things, and it can be very simple, but a lot of the children I worked with, they worked really hard in school just so they could get to come to art therapy. And so I know that helps people. So if there's anything we could do in that area, if you guys would let me know, I'd be happy to donate as much supplies as I could, or things, that maybe they could distribute to some of the younger kids, or whatever they think. So.
Yeah, so grateful, Kathy. I want to speak to, I want to acknowledge that and kind of create a space around it. And I imagine that not only those listening right now, but those who will be listening to this later, that we might be able to kind of form some sort of group to coordinate that. But I want to also speak into the record that Reverend Claire posted a butterfly hug on YouTube. YouTube is accessible to so many people, right? So maybe checking that out and seeing if that might be something that is easy to disseminate, if you will, and might offer a path of healing. Such an adorable name, Butterfly Hug, and again, knowing that there are certified therapists here, therapists in the Enneagram community who may feel called to be of support in that. I am also conscious knowing, so it's tricky, right? Because those of us who tend to volunteer, then suddenly it becomes bigger than, and so also knowing how to delegate and recognizing that Frederik now is trying to manage a bunch of programs in his work to disseminate, and then is also trying to help people. And so part of me doing the fundraising, send it to me, is just to take that piece off his plate, and understanding that there are some things that have to be on your plate because you're the only person who can get it to that other person, right? But also I want to see, just checking here where there might be other places where leadership is happening, where again, so that we're not exhausted by it, because it is like, this is just the beginning, right? And so that we can be sort of strong and have a sense of how we remain resilient and persevere throughout this by just taking care of ourselves in the beginning. Frederik, you in a way, what you've been through, you left your home and the place where your daughter was born, and so that's no small thing. And I know that you're one of those who are like, let's just get to work now, and just being aware also of your need for some tender care, if you will, some self-care. Yeah. So all that being true, at the same time. So thank you so much, Kathy and others. I just love how more interdisciplinary this approach is, and how systemic we were looking at it, because it is true, as Frederik and I were talking yesterday about this, that balance, even in his work, of how do you look at the right programming when we don't know what's going to happen next? Are we looking at something? Right now it's like, feed the people, give them medicine, there are things to alleviate human suffering, right now, to alleviate human suffering. And then there's that vision and the looking forward of like, what's sustainable, like what are people going to need in the long term, and how can we properly prepare for that, and really not exactly knowing what to do, and just openly having this conversation about that not knowing, if you will. And yeah. So Frederik, I'd love to, if there aren't any additional hands, this is, maybe one of more calls that we might have, but again, we really just wanted to make sure people knew who we were and what we're doing, and let you know where your money is going. Oh, is Reverend Claire, is your hand up again? Yeah, please.
Yeah, so the butterfly hug, when Laura spoke about somatic experience. That this is just a very simple technique that requires no words at all. And it's the, bilateral tapping to just meet with people in traumatic experiences. So I was thinking of you, Frederik, and your daughter and your family, and even just this for you. And so it's a very short video, but just a really quick way to say, we care about you, and may this be helpful to you, the caregiver, in the process.
Oh, so thank you so much, Rev Claire. Hey, Frederik. So you're tapping like this? Yeah.
I will.
Oh. Maybe that's how we should close.
Well, actually, before we close, there's maybe
Yeah.
one thought that I just want to throw in, and something that came up a few times to me in the last few days. Basically, when there's a call of help that is coming to us, when we are getting the opportunity to help, who needs this moment more? Is it the people who need the help, or is it us who are able to give the help? And I think it's a very important thought, like, what is the opportunity that we now have as human beings really to make this place a better place, and also to bring more humanity to humankind, actually.
Yeah.
We have a very responsible position right now, actually. And we should actually be, I don't want to sound ironic or cynical, but actually we are given a great opportunity now. We should actually be thankful that we are giving this opportunity to help other people now.
Yeah, wow. Thank you, Frederik. Beautiful. I want to add to that. When I was, probably should stop watching the news as much as I watch, but when I was watching the news yesterday and just watching people fleeing, I had that thought of, wow, her life, just thinking about my own, her life is irrevocably changed in this moment. Like there's this pattern, this path, and then just the realization of our lives, if we will let them be, are irrevocably changed, because this is like a world event, right? And it's like, and that choice point of like who we make space to become individually, but also collectively. And I think that's what you're speaking to, Frederik, of like, we get to, in this crack and in this break, like, who do we choose to be, right? And how that forms our collective future, right? So yeah, Mike, yeah. So thank you, both of you, Claire, Frederik. And I see that John has his hand raised, so we keep.
Yeah. Hi, Frederik. In the vein that you were just speaking in, I was really moved by your call for people to treat the Russian prisoners with compassion, and to use this as an opportunity to better the world in spite of the politics involved. Through economic necessity and by being outright duped. So many who are fighting against Ukraine just had no idea what they were actually walking into. So I hope the truth continues to leak out. But thank you so much for that humanitarian impulse.
Yeah, thanks, John. I just quickly want to react to that one, because basically it's basic psychology, right? Where the victim becomes the abuser. And this is the danger that Ukraine has now. This is actually what happened to Russia. Russia, or the Soviet Union, was a big victim of the Second World War. And 40 million people died. It had cities where half of the population was killed. Entire cities completely leveled. The Soviet Union was actually the victim much more than Europe, of the Second World War, but it became the abuser. And now this abuser is abusing Ukraine, and I would not want that Ukraine becomes, that this victim becomes another abuser. And it's what happens logically in almost every single war. But this is exactly what the Ukrainians need to do now. They just have to understand that this is basically like a cycle, right? It just keeps on going on and on, going on and on until somebody says that stop, this has to stop. And Ukraine now has the opportunity to stop this. But I'm actually very happy to see that there is so many of the prisoners of war are indeed treated very nicely. Some of the prisoners of war who just surrendered themselves, they're immediately given food by the local population. Local population goes actively to them and brings them food. And I think this is something that's very much hope-giving. I have been very shocked in the last few days, but I've been shocked both in the negative sense and in the positive sense. There's so much atrocity. From the other side, I think in the last few weeks, I've never seen so much support, compassion, and humanity as well. We live in a society where we hardly speak to our neighbors, right? And also many of my friends, they say that I finally met my neighbors. Finally, we're sitting together in the evening. We're having a drink together. We're talking about life. There's so much good happening as well. It's always about the balance, right? What's happening in the world now, these atrocities are so bad that it has to be counterbalanced by great humanity. But why do we need this kind of atrocities to have this humanity in our lives?
Thank you, John. And thank you, Frederik. I know we're quite over time, and
I think Joyce also wanted to come in.
yes, Joyce.
I just want you to know how much we appreciate the ability to give through you. We're not at a stage in our life when we can do too much else, but to know that you have your finger on the pulse of the needs of the people is just, it's just warms our hearts, and we just really are grateful for both of you and what you're doing and what you'll continue to do, we know. And we've full trust in whatever you decide is the best channel for this money. And we will certainly keep helping as we can. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you. And you're in our prayers daily. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joyce and Paul.
I just want to jump in to say thank you both for being so wise and compassionate. And I really want you to know how much I want you to take care of yourself, Frederik. It seems like there's so much responsibility you hold and so much potential, and you're navigating it with such love and wisdom. And like Claire said, and others have voiced, that time to care for yourself. I just wanted to offer that. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, Christina. It's really big responsibility, but again, I'm very grateful. I don't see it as look, indeed, I have 50 staff to still take care of. We have to design these new programs. Today I was working on a new program of $350 million. But still, I also want to do like filling the gaps and so on. But I don't see it as a responsibility. I see it more as an opportunity for which I'm thankful. Because the universe is giving me a great opportunity now. And I do what I have to do. And yes, I'm not sleeping much. But I did get some sleep in the weekend, and I played with the kids, and it's still important to be with them. But this is what I have to do. And thanks to all of you to support me in that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So everyone, I'm going to go back right now into gallery view. I know we've lost some people just due to the time, but I would like to close just with a moment of silence for everyone suffering. And let me shift the view here so that everybody, again, who's left here is on. So we join together. I know we come from different spiritual traditions, and so just inviting you to take a moment of silence or prayer in accordance with your own faith as we enter here now in sacred silence for the world. Amen. Thank you again, everyone, for joining us. I'll stop the recording now. And yeah.